This is the story of how an empire built on 30 years of whispers manipulation and borrowed authority was quietly dismantled by a single unannounced administrative update. Behind the heavy oak doors of royal residences, power is rarely absolute. It is usually an illusion sustained by proximity to the crown. What Queen Camilla just realised behind closed doors, and entirely too late, is that her proximity to King Charles offered her social dominance, but it offered her zero institutional protection against the one man who actually holds the deed to the future. In less than 24 hours of assuming the title of Duke of Cornwall, Prince William executed a silent, ruthless retaliation that sent a thunderclap through Camilla's family. He did not scream. He did not leak a narrative to the press. He simply waited for the exact legal moment when his signature became the only one that mattered, and then he locked her out. What you're about to understand is the breathtaking scope of the secret power grab Camilla attempted. How Prince William and Princess Anne tracked the paper trail of her royal exploitation, the devastating institutional execution that followed, and the chilling realization that currently keeps Camilla awake at night. The realization that despite the crown on her head, she actually owns absolutely nothing. To understand the sheer magnitude of her current commercial desperation, you first have to understand the towering height of the illusion she had built. For nearly 3 decades, Camilla operated with a singular quiet ambition. She did not just want to be Charles's wife, she wanted to erase the ghost of Diana, elevate her own non-royal children, and embed her bloodline into the very infrastructure of the British Monarchy. And for a long time, it looked as though she had succeeded perfectly. You have to remember how untouchable she felt right before the collapse. Before her wedding to Charles, in April 2005, William and Harry made one quiet, desperate plea to their father. They promised to welcome Camilla to support her, if only he would not marry her. They knew a wedding would force the public to compare Diana's tragic legacy to the woman who had haunted their childhoods. Charles ignored his sons. To pacify the British public, the palace made a strict binding promise. Camilla would only ever be known as Princess Consort. She would never take the title of Queen. William accepted this. He swallowed. His grief shook hands, smiled for the cameras, and allowed his mother's rival to step into the royal spotlight. But Camilla never intended to honour that boundary. Over the next 20 years, she worked the system from the inside out. When she needed Charles to view his sons as problematic or difficult, she would whisper her version of events into his ear behind closed doors. She slowly shaped his perception of reality. She cultivated deep transactional relationships with key British journalists. When she needed to polish her own image, glowing features appeared. When she needed to distract from her own missteps, highly damaging, carefully planted stories about Catherine and Meghan mysteriously found their way to the front pages. By the time Queen Elizabeth II entered her final months in 2022, Camilla had positioned herself as the gatekeeper to the future king. The dying queen, watching her own health fail and fearing the instability Charles might bring without his primary handler, made a decision born of surrender rather than approval. She publicly requested that Camilla be called Queen Consort. It was a staggering victory for a woman who had spent decades as a tabloid pariah, and yet it was still not enough. By the time the coronation arrived in May 2023, the word consort was quietly scrubbed from all official documents. She was simply queen. The ultimate erasure of Diana's legacy was complete. Camilla felt so incredibly secure in this new reality that her behaviour began to shift in public. What was once careful PR turned into overt displays of dominance. The world saw this clearly during a state visit by Donald Trump. As Catherine, the future queen, fell into an easy, natural conversation with Melania Trump, Camilla stepped into the frame with a cold flick of her wrist and a sharp, dismissive hand gesture. She signaled for Catherine to move aside. It was not a private disagreement. It was a public dressing down in front of world leaders. It was the body language of a woman pulling rank, reminding the mother of the future king exactly who was currently in charge. William saw that gesture. He saw the quiet indignities Catherine absorbed without a single word of complaint, and he filed every single detail away, waiting for the day his authority would surpass his father's. The trigger for William's retaliation did not actually start with a title or a public slight. It started with a staggering exploitation of royal finances. Hidden deep within the architecture of the monarchy is the Duchy of Cornwall. It is one of the oldest and most powerful private estates on earth, created in 1337 for the sole purpose of providing the eldest son of the monarch with total financial independence. It is worth over $1.2 billion. It spans 23 counties, includes ancient castles, entire islands, and generates tens of millions of dollars in liquid income every single year. The reigning monarch has zero legal control over it. While Charles was Duke of Cornwall, he used this vast empire to fund his lifestyle, his charities and his private household, but he also used it to fund Camilla's family. In 2005, shortly after their wedding, a woman named Annabel Elliot was quietly handed a highly lucrative contract to design the interiors of duchy properties across Cornwall, Wales and the Isles of Scilly. Annabel was hired without any competitive bidding process. She secured the contract entirely because she was Camilla's younger sister. For nearly 20 years, she collected a massive royal paycheck, transforming barns into lavish event spaces and designing holiday cottages. But there is a detail beneath this contract that turns a simple case of nepotism into a profound moral outrage. Annabel Elliot was not just an interior designer. Decades earlier, when Charles was still married to Diana, the affair with Camilla had to be hidden from the press and the palace. The place where they hid was a quiet, isolated country house in Dorset. That house belonged to Annabel Elliot. Weekend after weekend, Annabel provided the safe house the cover and the protection for the affair that emotionally destroyed the Princess of Wales. And decades later, this exact same woman was being richly rewarded with money generated by the estate tied to Diana's eldest son. William knew exactly where the money was going. He watched his mother's legacy effectively fund the payroll of the very people who had facilitated her heartbreak. He did not intervene while his father held the title. He knew the rules of institutional power. You do not strike until you hold the pen. On September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away at Balmoral. In the very second that Charles became King William, became the Duke of Cornwall. The law is absolute and automatic. The $1.2 billion estate, the vast lands, the commercial contracts, and the entire payroll transferred instantly into William's hands. For the first time in his life, he was completely financially independent from his father, and he immediately went to work. William did not call his stepmother to negotiate. He did not issue a press release. He weaponized administrative protocol with devastating precision. He simply ordered a review of all duchy expenditures and severed the financial lifeline. When the Duchy of Cornwall published its routine annual financial accounts months later, royal analysts noticed something missing. Annabel Elliot's name was gone. 20 years of comfortable royal employment had been terminated without a single public word. Palace sources released a carefully worded statement claiming the decision was no reflection on her work. But a different, colder source, close to William, made the reality incredibly clear. The Prince of Wales was cutting away the royal hangers-on. He was dismantling the lavish, unchecked spending his father had permitted. This was not a budget cut, it was a forensic eviction. It was William telling Camilla through the cold language of an empty payroll sheet that her family's access to the crown's wealth was over. Out went Camilla's sister. In came William's closest confidence men. He chose himself to manage the estate. The message echoed through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. The transition of power had already begun, and Camilla's people were no longer safe. The panic that set in was immediate. Camilla realized that if William could sever a 20-year contract without hesitating, her entire ecosystem was suddenly vulnerable. She attempted to reassert her dominance the only way she knew how, by forcing a confrontation over royal access. As Christmas approached, the royal family prepared to gather at Sandringham, one of the most sacred and historic family traditions. Knowing the tension was at a breaking point, Camilla intentionally invited her son, Tom Parker Bowles, to the main family gathering. She wanted to prove she still controlled the guest list. William's response was chilling in its restraint. He did not argue with his father. He did not leak a complaint. He simply refused to attend. When the royal family gathered for the main Christmas lunch, the future King of England was absent. Instead, William, Catherine and their children stayed at Anmer Hall, their private home on the Sandringham estate. They completely boycotted the main house. By forcing her son into the room, Camilla thought she had won a power struggle. But as she sat at the table in Sandringham, the terrifying reality of what William had just done finally washed over her. She'd forced the future king out of his own family Christmas. But Sandringham is a private estate. When Charles dies, Sandringham will belong exclusively to William. And as she looked around the grand dining room, the trap finally snapped shut in her mind. Camilla sat at the head of the table at Sandringham, surrounded by the gold-trimmed trappings of absolute monarchy. But the silence radiating from Anmer Hall across the estate was deafening. By forcing her son into the main house and causing Prince William to boycott the primary gathering, she thought she was demonstrating unshakable dominance. She thought she was proving that she controlled the royal calendar. but what she actually did was expose her own terrifying vulnerability. Sandringham House in Norfolk and Balmoral Castle in Scotland are not owned by the British government. They are not state assets managed by an anonymous heritage committee. They are privately owned properties passed directly from monarch to heir, entirely outside the jurisdiction of public tax law. Combined, they represent over $200 million in private real estate. Right now, Queen Camilla walks those historic halls, sleeps in those master bedrooms, and calls them her homes. But her name does not exist on a single legal deed. The moment King Charles passes, the legal transfer of those estates is instant and automatic. They become the sole, undisputed private property of Prince William. The very man she just alienated over a Christmas dinner will suddenly hold the keys to every door she walks through. Balmoral in particular carries an emotional weight that goes far beyond its staggering financial value. It is not just a holiday retreat, it is the site of the deepest trauma in William's life. In August of 1997, a 15-year-old William was staying at Balmoral when his father walked into his room before dawn to deliver the news that Diana had been killed in a Paris car crash. William and Harry walked those exact grounds completely shattered. Two boys trying to survive a grief no child should ever have to carry. And the psychological detail that sits underneath that tragedy, like a cold stone, is that when Charles received the initial news from Paris, the very first person he called was not his mother, the Queen. The first person he called was Camilla. She was there to comfort Charles before his own sons were even awake to hear that their mother was gone. Camilla now walks those same grounds at Balmoral as the Queen, but William has never forgotten who those grounds really belong to in his heart. And more importantly, he knows exactly who they will soon belong to on paper, behind the scenes. The psychological climax of this silent war is currently playing out between a dying king and an unyielding heir. King Charles, battling cancer and confronting the fragile reality of his own mortality, has reportedly started having urgent, highly personal conversations with his eldest son about the future. The message from Charles is essentially a desperate plea: leave Camilla alone, protect her. Do not push her out of the inner circle. It is the tragic, almost pathetic portrait of a monarch spending his final chapter trying to secure his wife's survival by appealing directly to the one person who has the ultimate power to erase her. But William's answer was not given in reassuring words. It was given in the silent removal of Annabel Elliot from the duchy payroll. It was given in a deliberate Christmas absence. William is giving his father the exact same devastating silence that Charles once gave Diana when she begged for her marriage to be saved. To understand the true depth of Camilla's commercial desperation, you have to look at the one fatal, irreversible mistake she made on her climb to the top. Years ago, long before she was Queen Camilla, owned a private property in Wiltshire called Raymill House. It was the one piece of the world that was completely and exclusively hers. She used to talk about it with genuine warmth, calling the garden her ultimate sanctuary. It was her private retreat, the one place where she could close the door, drop the heavy mask of royal duty, and simply exist away from the suffocating weight of the institution, but in a move designed to show her total, unwavering commitment to the crown, and to Charles she sold it. She sold the only home that was legally hers. The consequence of that single decision is now absolute when Charles dies. The woman who spent 20 years meticulously engineering her way to the top of the most powerful family in Britain will be essentially homeless. She will possess no private property of her own anywhere in the world. The woman who once manipulated the British press and commanded courtiers will be entirely dependent on the goodwill of the stepson she helped push out of his own mother's shadow. She will live exactly where Prince William allows her to live, and not a single inch further. And it is not just her physical housing that will evaporate overnight. It is the very identity she fought so ruthlessly to secure. Camilla's royal title is not protected by birthright. She is a royal by marriage, only an administrative reality that leaves her completely exposed. The exact second Charles is gone, the legal mechanism of the monarchy shifts without a drop of sentimentality. William instantly becomes king. Catherine instantly becomes queen, and Camilla loses the title of the queen entirely. It passes immediately and rightfully to Catherine. Camilla would most likely be restyled as Queen Dowager, a traditional title designating the widow of a king. While it is not a shameful designation, it is a massive, highly visible institutional step back. It means moving out of the primary palaces, stepping back from the center of power, and becoming a secondary background figure in a court run by her stepson and the woman she once tried to publicly dismiss. You have to look at how perfectly the system is correcting itself. When Camilla raised her hand and shooed Catherine away during that state visit with Donald Trump, she thought she was cementing her supreme authority. But Catherine's silent, uncomplaining endurance is what actually won the long game. Catherine never leaked stories to the press. She never threw tantrums over titles. She simply did the work, secured the lineage, and waited for time to do what time always does. Now, Catherine is preparing to inherit the ultimate title, while Camilla is realizing that her own title was nothing more than a temporary lease. There is a terrifying historical precedent for this exact kind of administrative revenge, and Prince William knows precisely how it works. Following the highly public divorce, King Charles famously stripped Diana of her Royal Highness title. It was a petty, vindictive institutional move that deeply humiliated the Princess of Wales, reducing her status in a world obsessed with hierarchy. William was a young boy when he watched that happen to his mother. He reportedly told her with tears in his eyes that he would give her title back to her one day when he was king. Now, decades later, he finally holds that ultimate authority. He cannot give the title back to his mother, but he has the absolute, unchecked power to dictate the terms of Camilla's remaining years. He controls her housing, her financial access, her security detail, and her public standing. He holds every single card in the deck. The ultimate devastating irony of this entire saga is that Queen Camilla built this trap entirely by herself. She believed that manipulating Charles was the exact same thing as controlling the institution of the monarchy. She confused the illusion of absolute power with actual legally binding authority. She spent 3 decades carefully erasing Diana's legacy, demanding the highest titles, and embedding her own family into the royal payroll, never once realizing that she was building her empire on land owned by someone else. She was completely dependent on a system that would inevitably be inherited by Diana's fiercely protective, highly observant son. Camilla traded her independence for a glittering crown she only gets to wear for a borrowed amount of time. Now, the silent transition of power has already begun. Prince William is meticulously placing his own fiercely loyal people inside the Duchy of Cornwall, quietly securing the financial borders and waiting for the inevitable day the master keys are permanently handed over. Camilla walked into the highest echelons of royal power with her eyes wide open, but she failed to secure an exit strategy. The heavy oak doors of the palace are slowly closing, and this time she will be the one standing on the outside. If you found this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics and silent warfare of the British royal family insightful, make sure to subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments below.